It was a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind that lulled you into a false sense of security. I had just poured myself a glass of wine and was halfway through a mindless TV show when the phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the school principal, Mrs. Harmon. "Mrs. Anderson," she said, her voice clipped and urgent. "There's been an incident involving Tommy. Can you come to the school immediately?" My heart pounded as I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. The drive to the school felt like an eternity, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. When I arrived, Mrs. Harmon was waiting at the front office, her expression grave. "Tommy's in the nurse's office," she said, leading me down the hall. "There was a fight during recess." I burst into the nurse's office to find Tommy sitting on a cot, his face bruised and a cut on his lip. His eyes were red from crying. Across the room sat another boy, Jason, with a bloody nose and a swollen cheek. His parents stood behind him, their faces etched with fury. "What happened?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Tommy looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I didn't start it. Jason kept calling me names, and when I told him to stop, he pushed me. I pushed back, and then he hit me. I had to defend myself." Jason's father, Mr. Collins, stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "Your son is a menace. Jason has never been in a fight before, and now look at him. We should press charges for this assault." Mrs. Harmon interjected, trying to keep the situation under control. "Everyone, please, let's remain calm. We need to get to the bottom of this. Both boys are suspended for 3 days, and we highly recommend counseling." The word "suspended" hit me like a punch in the gut. I nodded numbly, knowing there was no arguing with the principal's decision. "Come on, Tommy," I said, taking his hand. "Let's go home." As we walked out, Mr. Collins shouted after us, "This isn't over. We're not letting this slide." The next morning, my inbox pinged with an email that made my blood run cold. The Collins had hired a lawyer and were threatening to sue us for medical expenses, emotional distress, and punitive damages. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. I called our family lawyer, Ms. Reynolds, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for being tough as nails. "We need to meet," I said, my voice shaking. "They're trying to sue us over a schoolyard fight." In her office, Ms. Reynolds listened intently as I recounted the events. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said finally. "We'll respond formally and push for mediation. Going to court should be a last resort." The next few weeks were a blur of legal documents, meetings, and sleepless nights. I barely ate, my stomach a knot of anxiety. Ms. Reynolds was a rock, guiding me through every step with unwavering confidence. Finally, the day of the mediation arrived. Sitting across from the Collins and their lawyer in a sterile conference room, the tension was palpable. Mr. Collins glared at me, his eyes burning with anger. Mrs. Collins clutched her purse, her knuckles white. Ms. Reynolds began, her voice steady and authoritative. "We understand the Collins' concerns, but this was an altercation between two children. Tommy was provoked and defended himself. We propose covering Jason's medical expenses and issuing a formal apology." The Collins lawyer, a slick man with a permanent smirk, leaned forward. "That's not enough. Our clients are seeking damages for emotional trauma. Jason has been deeply affected by this incident." My heart sank. How had things spiraled so out of control? I glanced at Tommy, who sat beside me, pale and silent. I had to fight for him. Ms. Reynolds didn't miss a beat. "We reject any claims of long-term emotional trauma without proper evaluation by a neutral child psychologist. Additionally, we have witnesses who can attest that Jason instigated the fight." A tense silence filled the room. The Collins huddled with their lawyer, whispering furiously. Finally, Mr. Collins spoke. We accept the settlement for medical expenses and the apology, but if there's any more trouble, we will pursue this further. Relief washed over me, mingled with exhaustion. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Back home, I watched Tommy playing quietly in the yard, his usual energy dampened by the ordeal. As he climbed the tree, he looked back at me. Mom, am I in big trouble? I walked over and hugged him tightly. No, honey. You're not in trouble. We're going to get through this. Together. As I held him, I knew this was just the beginning. The world could be cruel and unforgiving, but I would stand by Tommy, no matter what battles lay ahead. The fight was over, but our struggle for normalcy was just beginning.